In this edition of Locked On Capitals, Matt Weyrich joins us once again as we talk about the inconsistent play of the Capitals this season. The Caps are now 2-5 this month and just lost to the Lightning by a score of 3-6 after beating them Friday by a score of 5-1. What changed? We'll talk about all of that and more next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
You're Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen or view of the day. Yes, this podcast is also available in video form, so head on over to YouTube and check it out. And when you're on YouTube, make sure and hit that subscribe button. And if you like the videos, give it a thumbs up. It really helps grow the channel. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we're happy to have Matt Weyrich of NBC Sports Washington back on the show. Matt, welcome.
Thanks, Dan. Good to be here.
So let's just get going in here. This Washington Capitals team is a bit of a hard team to figure. On Friday, they beat them handily by a score of 5-1. And then last night, they lose by a score of 3-6. What changed? I mean, if you take a look at the lineups, the only real difference I saw was Nick Aube-Kubel out, Connor McMichael in. So what gives?
Yeah, I think that the Lightning just came out as the more aggressive team there. They obviously jump ahead to that 4-0 lead in the first period. And, from there, it was pretty much Caps trying to play catch up, and they never really climbed back into it. This was a kind of a, angry Lightning team, having just been embarrassed there in DC with the Capitals, of course, getting that big hit from Nick Aube-Kubel, who was suspended, of course, for that hit, the blindside one. After that, this Lightning team, which is a very good team, it's a team that's been to the Stanley Cup each of the last 3 years. They were determined. They know how to respond for moments like that, and they showed it. While the Capitals, they looked like they were coasting out there a little bit, maybe a little bit too much of resting on their laurels, and ultimately they paid the price for it. So they're going to have to now come back here with an upcoming stretch of games this week and try to prove that they are still in the hunt for a playoff spot in that Eastern Conference, which right now is pretty muddled.
Yeah, I mean, it's so surprising. It seems to me like a team that is lacking an identity. A veteran of the team, Lars Eller, said that the Caps play was arrogant and said it was complete horse poop. I'll leave it at that. He said, and today we were casual, almost a little arrogant. It was tough to watch, tough to be a part of, Eller said, adding it was disappointing. It's not what I think our true identity is. So that's the question. I listened to, in the beginning of the year, I listened to all the Caps insiders. I listened to you and Sammy Silver and Samantha Pell and all of them, Tarek El-Bashir, and everyone's consensus was that this was a bubble team. And I wanted to think, based on the big moves, picking up Connor Brown and Darcy Kuemper and all these moves, that maybe they'd be bigger and better than that. But as it turns out, you guys were right. And as it stands right now, they are a bit of a bubble team. Is that your assessment of this team? And where do you see them going forward? Do they have enough in the tank right now to go anywhere this year?
I think they've definitely played it right now. And, we talk about the identity of this team. It's hard for them to forge an identity with all of the injuries that they've had to this point. If you look over at moneypuck.com, you can see all of the different line groupings that have played this year across the NHL. And there've been, I believe, over 70 this season that have played at least 50 minutes together. The Caps only have 2 forward lines that have played together all of that time, and one of them being their fourth line. So, they really haven't, among that top 6, top 9 forwards, haven't been able to generate a lot of chemistry. I believe we're going to see Sonny Milano moving up to the top line in this upcoming game tomorrow against the Panthers. So that's going to be a brand new combination there with him playing across Ovechkin. So, they really haven't been able to generate this identity. It's been hard to say what this team is capable of because we just haven't seen it. But if you look at the fact, the reality is they are right there in the middle of the Eastern Conference. Nobody has really been able to pull away. The Caps are just 1 point out of a playoff spot if the season were to end today. So all they have to do really is stay afloat. They're getting guys like TJ Oshie and Tom Wilson back. Maybe Nicholas Backstrom makes an impact down the line. what this team looks like once those guys are in the lineup. It's certainly going to be better than what they have now. So you think that if they can at least hang around until then, maybe they have a chance to move up, where teams like the Penguins are struggling with pretty much their whole roster intact. So that's at least a good sign that the Capitals might be able to put together a second half run if they can just hang around 500 long enough to still be in it, once these guys are ready.
Yeah, and they got back a really big person in John Carlson. Like we talked about all the different injuries on this team. Just to kind of recap them all, John Carlson is back. Dmitry Orlov is day-to-day. TJ Oshie, Tom Wilson, Nick Backstrom, Beck Malenstein, Connor Brown, Carl Hagelin. Oh my, they really are kind of starting to stack up here. And one of the things that I looked at was that Dmitry Orlov is truly one of the only players that's listed as day-to-day. You are an insider. You are someone that covers this team on a daily basis. Has the status of TJ Oshie changed? And one of the last things I heard that TJ Oshie is not day-to-day anymore. Did I read that incorrectly? Someone kind of brought this to my attention on YouTube. Is there anything that you know more about the status of TJ Oshie?
Oshie is still listed as out indefinitely. Now, he's on injured reserve, so that's kind of the status quo. They haven't put an exact timeline on his return, but he did return to practice in a limited capacity last week. Didn't make it out there for any of the optional skates the rest of the way. So we've really only seen him take the ice once. It was in a kind of a pre-practice setting, wasn't going full speed. So I would guess that he is still not necessarily close to returning. He did not travel with the team on this 3-game road trip that they're on. So the earliest that he could return is this weekend, but I highly doubt he would be back for that first game. So I think we're looking at next week at the earliest, but really it's all kind of up in the air and depends on his timeline. Though Dmitry Orlov, while he's on IR, he did travel with the team and is eligible to return now. I would not be surprised if he's activated tomorrow, but we'll see if he comes out for morning skate. That's going to kind of be a big determiner because they will have to make a roster move in order to activate him.
Yeah, one of the things that John Carlson had said is he said after the Caps beat the Lightning on Friday is we can beat any team we want to when we want to. I'm paraphrasing it. And then they fall flat on Sunday. But to your point, you can't overlook the injuries. The injuries are killing the Caps. As you probably read, they're played the last little bit with a collective $40 million in salaries on the shelf. So you take a look at a lot of these big players, TJ Oshie and Tom Wilson. For me, taking a look at it, Tom Wilson is the one of the greatest impact that's missing from this team. There's a lot of teams that are kind of really testing this team as far as the physical game is concerned. You saw Maroon want to mix it up, and all of a sudden, Irwin is a fighter. Tell me if you saw Irwin being a fighter. If you saw that, you should probably bet more in Las Vegas. I never saw that, but I think to a certain extent, you're starting to have to see these guys emerge as fighters because Tom Wilson is what I would revere is the sheriff of the Washington Capitals. And at the end of the day, you push my guys around, I'm going to have a shift with you sooner or later, and you're going to have to answer to me. They don't have that on the ice. You take a look at it, Garnet Hathaway to a certain extent, but he almost seems to get overpowered because everyone gangs up on him. Who is the true tough guy on this team that's going to hold these guys at bay? Because I don't want to pigeonhole Tom Wilson as just this goon, this tough guy. Maroon and Ryan Reeves have that role locked down. Tom Wilson is a legitimate goal scorer, 20-plus goals. Who is going to be that tough guy that says, you're not pushing this team around?
Yeah, I think it's still kind of up for debate as to who takes over that role. As you said, Tom Wilson, definitely more than just an enforcer. Garnet Hathaway has been, I would say, the player who's most been involved in little skirmishes, things like that, dropping the gloves so far. But, they're kind of looking for a lot of different places. I mean, we saw this earlier in the year against the Ottawa Senators is a game that really stood out to me is Caps going against a younger team that kind of had its way with the Capitals, getting away with some big hits that maybe with Tom Wilson on the ice, that might not have been the case. And the Capitals were a little bit slow to respond. They still tend to rack up the hits. And I think that the addition of Nick Aube-Kubel from the Maple Leafs, we saw in the playoffs last year, he made a big impact for the Avalanche down the stretch there. Despite not scoring a single goal in the playoffs, he still led the team in hits throughout the entire Stanley Cup playoffs. So, he was out there making an impact in the physicality side of the game, and that counts, that matters. And we saw with the Capitals immediately putting him on the third line as soon as they acquired him, that was a big role for him right off the bat. So losing him to a quick suspension obviously not optimal for this team, as they're still looking, as we said, to build that identity and find those guys who are going to step up in Wilson's absence, because it's going to be at least another month before we see him back on the ice.
Yeah, and that's what I've heard too, is that if the Caps team is waiting for a lot of these players to come back, they're going to sink way down the standings. So they've got to find a way to rise above. I think they have the players in-house. They just have to make the most of them. All right, so after the break here, we will talk about Connor McMichael and what his future is with the team. And then we'll talk about the Capitals' netminding situation. Despite the poor play of the team at times, the netminding has been their saving grace. We'll talk about that after the break. Today's episode of Locked On Capitals is brought to you by Simply Safe. If you've ever thought about securing your home with home security but have been putting it off, you'll want to listen up. Right now, Locked On Capital listeners can order the #1 rated Simply Safe home security system for 50% off. This is their biggest offer of the year, and you won't want to miss it. Here's why I love it. Did you know that over the holidays, property crimes like burglaries and package theft spike nationally? That's why our friends at Simply Safe Home Security are offering 50% off their award-winning security system so that more families can feel safe and secure this holiday season. Order your Simply Safe system for half off today and enjoy advanced security and greater peace of mind this holiday season. Here's why I love it. I had an issue where someone broke into my home. Simply Safe dispatched the police and took care of the situation. In an emergency, 24/7 professional monitoring agents used Fast Protect technology exclusively from Simply Safe to capture critical evidence and verify the threat is real so you can get priority police response. Simply Safe is whole home security with advanced sensors for every room, window, and door, HD security cameras for inside and out, smarter ways to detect motion that alert you only when the threat is real, and even hazard sensors that detect fire, floods, and other threats to your home. Don't miss your chance to save big on the only security system I recommend. Get 50% off any new Simply Safe system at simplysafe.com/lockedonnhl. This is their biggest discount of the year, so you don't want to wait. That's simplysafe.com/lockedonnhl. There's no safe like Simply Safe. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, where it's your team every day. In this episode, we are joined once again by Matt Weyrich of NBC Sports Washington, and we take a look at the inconsistent play on this team. You know, it's funny, last year, the biggest inconsistency on the team was netminding. It seems like the Caps took care of that, and now everything else is inconsistent. We take a look at the play of Darcy Kuemper last night. He got pulled early. It's my assessment that he got pulled more of as a momentum change. I think that, he had a couple bad bounces. I don't put this squarely on his shoulder. I think that the Caps kind of played a little bit poorly in front of him. So oftentimes they do that just to kind of say, we're going to try to change things up. And, to a certain extent, it seemed to work as Charlie Lindgren came in and saved 24 of 25. You watched the game last night and have watched this Capitals goaltending tandem. What are your thoughts on Darcy Kuemper? I think if it wasn't for Kuemper and Lindgren, they would have lost some of those games by even a larger margin.
I think you're absolutely right, Dan. I mean, if you really want to point to the MVPs of this young season so far for the Caps, it's got to be Alex Ovechkin and Darcy Kuemper. Kuemper's made 13 starts so far and has proven to be every bit of the goalie that they expected him to be when they signed him over the offseason. Coming in, making over $5 million, being a reigning Stanley Cup champion. There was a lot of expectations on his shoulders, and it wasn't like he was in the situation that Vitek and Ilya Samsonov were in last year, where one had to earn the spot over the other. The keys to the car were handed to Kuemper, and they said, we're going to follow you all the way through. And that's been very true. I mean, Kuemper started almost as many games as anybody in the NHL thus far, and he's been very effective. And, I just wrote a piece that went up on NBCSportsWashington.com on the play of these goaltenders thus far this year, breaking it down. And Kuemper, he's faced the most odd man rushes of any goaltender in the all of NHL this year, yet he saved over 4 goals over expected. That's been a really impressive feat for him, just to be as sturdy as he's been in this team. As you mentioned, he gets pulled yesterday, but there were some unlucky bounces. 2 of the goals he allowed bounced off of Capitals players into the goal. So that's just really unfortunate for him. They pull Lindgren. He comes in and he's been pretty, effective as well. He's got a little bit more inflated numbers than Kuemper does. But if you look at some of the opponents that he's faced this year, I mean, it's teams like the Maple Leafs, it's team like the Lightning, the Edmonton Oilers, very high caliber teams, offensive firepower that he's going up against and still putting up pretty solid numbers. And the team overall, I would say, has some of the better goaltending in the NHL right now.
Yeah, and just a saving grace on this team. The biggest thing I've heard about it, and I would say it's true, is the Capitals power play. The Capitals are 0 for 15 on the power play over the past 30 games, 0 for 5 last night after going 4 for 5 on the power play versus Edmonton on Monday. So again, it just seems like it kind of vacillates back and forth, that they can kind of find their groove and then sometimes they can't. I'm not reinventing the wheel here when I say the Caps need to play better 5-on-5. Is that what you think their biggest struggle is? And when they are playing a 5-on-5 hockey, or say they go on the power play, they never kind of converge and score a goal on it. We take a look at the game last night. When they were on the PK, the Lightning were on the PK. It was stifling on that Capitals team. Tell me a little bit about the Caps and their not being able to execute 5-on-5.
Yeah, the Caps are getting off the amount of shots that you would expect a potent offensive team to do. I mean, they haven't necessarily been running into a lot of traffic in the neutral zone, not generating clean entries and failing to generate chances. Those chances have been there. It really has been the finish. And it kind of goes back to what you mentioned earlier with John Carlson's quote saying, we can hang with anybody. That's true. The Caps have only lost by 3 goals or less all season. They haven't really been blown out. Those weird goals at the end of that Lightning game last night kind of prevented it from being a blowout. But for the most part, the other 2 games that they did lose by 3 goals, those were empty netters that made it a 3-point deficit as opposed to 2. So for the most part, the Capitals have hung in there with every team they played and been able to play up to the level of competition. It's just been finishing. And I think that really comes down to, obviously execution with the players, but also just generating the chemistry, knowing where to be on a player, on a rush, trying to make that extra pass, knowing, he's not going to be open. I've got to, shoot the puck now. I've seen time and time again, Kuznetsov and Sheary going down the ice, 2 guys who up until this year really haven't had a lot of chances to skate together, just not being in sync on a lot of those plays. That's something that just comes with time. And those 2 guys really didn't even spend time together in training camp working on these things because Connor Brown was skating with the top line. So, this is kind of what we're seeing in real time here with this Capitals team of figuring themselves out and trying to adjust on the fly because, these games count now. They have no choice but to try and get out there and score as often as they can. And so far, it's kind of been a bit of a work in progress for this offense.
Yeah, and so, the Capitals, they went out and they kind of tried to solidify some of these open holes on the roster. They went out and signed Sonny Milano, who you talked about in the beginning of the show. Just a really great pickup for this Capitals team, a bit of a diamond in the rough, if you will. Kind of reminds me when they signed Brett Conley or Devontae Smith-Pelly all those years ago. So Brian McClellan and company, they have a great eye for that. So the question now is what does that mean for Connor McMichael? It seems like he's always looking for his opportunity. And then when the opportunity presents itself, say someone gets injured, it gets snatched away from him. I got to say that when he does play out there as of late, he hasn't always really shown up on the score sheet. He hasn't really shown why he should be there. I suppose that's why he's not getting these roles. So with Connor McMichael, do you think that he would be better served to play in Hershey where he can develop his game? You got to think sitting up in the press box and being a healthy scratch is not helping his development.
Yeah, there's certainly a case to be made there. And, I've asked Peter Laviolette about that before. And, he's talked about how important it is. There's 2 sides of that coin that he thinks that being around this team is also, providing him with some learning experiences as well. I do agree. I think that with you, I mean, I think that, sending him down to Hershey to play every day certainly can't hurt this stage, especially considering he is still waiver exempt. So the Capitals won't risk exposing him to other teams by sending him down. He's one of the youngest players in the NHL right now, and he's sitting out there on a night-to-night basis, getting starts here and there. And when he does, he really hasn't been making much of an impact. I mean, in 5 games this year, he has 1 shot on goal. The Capitals have talked about, when they put McMichael out there, they're looking for him to show him something. And that doesn't mean, getting into a fight and going to the penalty box, which he has done on one occasion this year. It's more, what are you going to do offensively? Sonny Milano has showed up and immediately, even on plays that he wasn't necessarily finishing, was at least showing some style, showing some flash of the potential that he can have as a scorer. That's what we are supposed to be seeing from Connor McMichael. That's supposed to be his best attribute, is his playmaking abilities. And so far, he's kind of been silent on that front. And I think that is probably the biggest reason why you'd want to send him down, so that he can get more comfortable, make some of those plays against lower competition, and then come back up to the NHL a little bit more polished.
Because it seems like, every time he gets in there, this is his great chance and then kind of just falls flat. That was kind of the same thing for Hendricks Lop here. So that's my contention with that is, when these guys get their opportunity, and I know it's been in a limited sample size, they have to make the most of it. I will say one thing about Connor McMichael is he is a bit of a lightning rod. If I say anything disparaging about him on this podcast, people will say, you can't, cut him down. He hasn't had enough opportunities. I get that. But if he doesn't, live up to his potential as an everyday NHL player, then I think he would be best served down in Hershey, where he can get some regular playing time. All right, so after the break here, we are going to talk about the play of Evgeny Kuznetsov and Anthony Mantha, and where do they fit in at the end of all of this? We'll talk about that next. Today's episode of Locked On Capitals is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, and news and analysis. Get all of the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From football to basketball to soccer and esports, we've got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. And guys, even if you're not into betting, you can bet on upcoming Capitals games, so it makes it that much more exciting. So go to BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, where it's your team every day. In this episode, we are joined by Matt Weyrich of NBC Sports Washington. So the next player I'm going to talk about is a player that's always really hot and cold, and that's Evgeny Kuznetsov. As of late, he's kind of been playing a little bit better. Evgeny Kuznetsov now has points in 3 of his last 4 games, with 6 points over that span. What is your thoughts on Evgeny Kuznetsov? I know that last year he kind of had a breakout year, and then the year before that he was on the trade block. It seems like a guy that's kind of really struggling for an identity or consistency anyway.
Yeah, I think if you want to talk about a guy who's really struggled to finish plays, Kuznetsov is probably at the center of it. I mean, he's been generating opportunities, and even though he took a while to score his first goal, he was racking up some assists, so he was making plays, he was getting involved in the mix. But he's also, with TJ Oshie out, with Nicholas Backstrom out, with Tom Wilson out, he is a guy who is really important to this Capitals team in terms of generating offense. And after we saw what he did last year, there were a lot of expectations for him this season, no doubt. And he was paired up with Alex Ovechkin, which he had really not been as much as he had that season in years past. And that seemed to really work. But then they came out of the gate and they just weren't scoring like they were expected. So Kuzi got bounced down to the second line. He was also bounced off the top power play unit, and he's gone back and forth since then. As Peter Laviolette and the Capitals coaching staff had tried to get him going. So ultimately, he's done a little bit better in these last few games, and it's definitely been encouraging to see him take those steps forward. But overall, the body of work has not been what we come to expect from Kuznetsov, especially coming off a career year like he had last season.
Yeah, and the Capitals expect and they need a lot more out of him, as he is the top line center most of the time anyway. With Nick Backstrom out and, just a myriad of injuries, it's, they got to get these players to score, because they're not getting it from a lot of the other players because they're out of the lineup on a night-to-night basis. Another big player that is kind of really hot and cold is Anthony Mantha, who they got in that Jacob Vrana deal. It just seems like when he first came to this team, he kind of went on a scoring rampage, and then it dissipated. But Anthony Mantha, he acknowledged that he needs to score a lot more, but as much needed after ending a 7-game goal drought against Arizona. Talk to me a little bit about Anthony Mantha. Good skater. He's got a good shot, but he just seems to be very hot and cold What is the future plans for Anthony Mantha in this lineup?
Yeah, they've given him every opportunity to emerge as a potential top six forward on this team. Like we said, with all of these guys out, there are opportunities there for guys to step up, and Mantha is someone the team has looked to do it. And I think hot and cold is a perfect way to describe it. When he disappears from the stat sheet altogether. He's really not even getting very many shots off. We seem to not see his line overall do very well. Him and Eller have been paired up mostly this year, and that line has kind of disappeared at times. But when they are clicking, I really like the Eller and Mantha combo. I think that they have shown some good chemistry, and maybe that's something they can build off moving forward. But for right now, I would say that he does need to show that consistency. He's got one more year left on his deal. The Capitals obviously gave up a promising young player in Vrana, along with a first-round pick to get him. So they invested a lot of capital in him being a big part of this team, and so far. We've seen him at his best. As you mentioned, when they first acquired him, he went on a nice stretch last season. Down the stretch, he really did well, but then didn't score a single goal in the playoffs. So they need him to be more consistent and to be the guy that they hoped they acquired when they gave up a lot of assets to get him.
Yeah, and we hope that we can get that from him. But one of the pleasant surprises for me, and I'm sure it is for you and all Caps fans, is the fourth line always gets great production. It was Hagelin, Dowd, and Hathaway before Hagelin got injured. They always get some great production down there. Beck Malenstein came in to play left wing on the fourth line and slid in front of a puck and got injured. The fourth line was going along so well until all the injuries started to stack up. Who do you see being that fourth line left wing on a night in, night out basis? Do you think it's going to be Sonny Milano? Do you think it's going to be Kubel? Who do you see filling that role?
Well, like you said, it has changed a lot so far this year. We've seen Joe Snively in that spot. We've seen Beck Malenstein in that spot. Obviously, it's the Carl Hagelin spot, but he is not going to be making a return anytime soon. It looks like they're giving Alexi Protas a shot there, and I really like his fit on that fourth line. He's not necessarily the most physical player, but I think he makes up for that a little bit more with his size, being one of the largest players on the team. He put on some weight. He skates very well, which is really important to be on this fourth line, as they kind of are this defense line that goes against a lot of the top lines of opposing teams to keep them out of their defensive zone. So I like him as an opportunistic scorer and somebody who can take advantage of a quick chance. And that's exactly what Dowd and Hathaway have proven to do in their short time, the last couple of years, sharing this line together. So I think Protas is a natural fit there. And I'm interested to see how the three of them gel together and how much runway they really get with all these injuries and guys coming back, whether or not Protas gets shuffled around.
Yeah, because I mean, oftentimes when you look at the fourth line, you don't see the fourth line as a line that gets all the production. You just kind of see that as like an AHL or some snarled old vet, something like that. So for the Capitals to continue to get that production from the fourth line is really a bright spot. So, Matt, before I let you go here, why don't you tell everyone where we can find your work?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter by Matt Weyrich, as long as Twitter is still up and going. But you can check out all of my written work over at NBCSportsWashington.com.
All right, Matt, thank you so much for joining me. And thank you for making Locked On Capitals your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. So once again, thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, where it's your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.